Yaden, and this is Input Doc. It's the podcast where we explore what marketers need and what agencies provide. Let's give this a shot. I'll go ahead and introduce you.
Okay.
Corinne Callister is the Product Design Director at Ledger 8760. You're also an adjunct faculty at the University of Washington, where you've taught both design and research. And so I was looking around for a good description of Ledger 8760. And on LinkedIn, I ran into a data-driven energy and sustainability services company and technology platform, cleaning and powering tomorrow's grid. Could you describe that to me, what that means?
Absolutely. I'll try my best to break it down. It's something that I struggle to do a little bit because for a lot of exciting reasons, we're sort of the first product of its kind in the energy space. So I often feel like I have to kind of talk about energy markets and figure out, because before joining Ledger, I didn't know about this ecosystem and how it all worked, and the fact that, there are huge power traders sort of functioning in the way that Wall Street functions, right? You have a broker who's going out into what's called the energy imbalance market every day. If you're a large business, say you're a casino and you're over or under on your scheduled power, you have to pick up the phone and call somebody and say, hey, I need more power. Or, hey, can you sell my excess power? Which you can imagine has been incredibly volatile in the space of COVID, right? Big hospitality companies like hotels, for example, that are used to using tons of power, like giant loads of megawatt hours per day that are very expensive, where, electricity is actually often their largest expense as an organization, are having to dial back their energy usage and try to sell that in the market. Some of these contracts for energy last 5 years. So I have my base power of what I think I need to run my casino no matter what. And then I have market products that I'll go out and buy to sort of add or subtract from that. And actually, until now, it's all been done in spreadsheets, which is really crazy. So the founders of Ledger, Josh Griffin and Josh Weber, who I work with every day, are actually folks who used to represent clients in these kind of arbitrage cases where someone would find an error in a spreadsheet that happened over the course of maybe 4 or 5 years. That little mistake can add up to millions of dollars in power that was either not served or underserved. And taking that into a court scenario was just a nightmare. And so what our software tries to do and our platform is actually visualizes energy. So those loads, those products that I'm talking about, on an hour by hour basis, so that energy managers and sustainability directors actually have insight and transparency for the first time. Data visualization, right? Not just spreadsheets, so they can look at what their utility is looking at and say, hey, I didn't get that power I bought, or, oh, I need more. Let me pick up the phone and try to figure out how to make that happen, because temperature and humidity, for example, have huge impacts on whether people are going to use power. So if everybody in Nevada is like, oh, it's really hot, and they go crank up their AC at the same time, then everybody's got to figure out how to pull those levers and meet that demand.
Interesting. So a municipality would probably be purchasing as a group, whereas I'm a homeowner. I live in Ballard. Can I opt out and purchase at my own rate?
Well, there's all these exciting things happening, right? Where people are using their own solar on site. There's even a future or a world in which maybe you as Tim could offset and sell your solar energy back into the grid. Those systems don't exist quite yet, but that's a place we might get to, where there could be a consumer market where you're actually trading energy as an individual.
I want to say 15 years ago or so, I helped write a website for a company called Southwest Wind Power that would place like a windmill in your backyard. And I remember this being part of it, that for some periods of time, you could be off the grid and basically not using energy and just using your own. But if there was excess, it could be transferred elsewhere.
Right. I guess let me ask you a question. After it goes elsewhere, what was your understanding of what happened to that energy? Because I think that's the part that's most confusing, is where does it go? Where do the electrons flow? Right.
Yeah, I don't know. But I do want to say that this is probably one of the most wonderful things about what we do, in that we get to do deep dives into different types of businesses, different industries, and you never really always know where you're going to land. And it could be wind power, it could be energy, it could be organic farming. At the moment, we're working on a site for automated indoor farming controls.
Cool.
There are many disparate pieces of hardware that an indoor farmer currently uses, and there's nothing specifically that's affordable to an entry-level farmer that they can tie everything together. They can for a large amount of money, but not for less. And so to sit here and you get to describe to me, I mean, probably last time I chatted with you was 6 months or so. And in the last 6 months, you've got to do a deep dive on energy. I mean, what a great advertisement for why to become a designer.
I think you really said it. It's like, maybe that's the thing that draws me to design the very most, actually, is I always feel like I'm more of a researcher at the end of the day, and the output happens to be something visual, right? But I love, and this is my first time at Ledger working in-house. I've worked as a consultant exclusively in design. So exactly what you said, you have 2 months, 2 weeks, quick, go become an expert on this random thing. And that's actually what you get to do as a podcaster too. And I think I did some audio storytelling in my thesis in grad school. And I think, again, it's like, if you're drawn to design, you're actually probably just a little anthropologist or journalist on the inside that wants to kind of understand something about how the world works and keep doing that process. It's so rewarding.
Oh, I love going down rabbit holes and learning everything I can about a business. And we get paid to do it. It's absurd. I mean,
I know. They're like, we'll let the designer in the room because they have to make something out of all of this. So you get to be privy to all of these conversations. And yeah, I'm like, maybe we should have a trivia night of designers and see like what random knowledge exists.
So you joined Ledger when?
I joined Ledger in April of 2019, so last spring.
What is the process for getting up to speed at a fairly technical company like that?
It's been pretty organic. I'm the only designer, and I also joined before we had a director of product, so somebody who manages the product process. And I was sort of sharing that role with our CEO, who's very invested in the day-to-day. And we run an agile process. And that's actually really helpful for the structure because I've never done formal product management, but I had to kind of step into that role with him. And I think it allowed me to just, for better or worse, drink from the fire hose. And again, that's what we have to do as designers. You always have that moment when you first start of like, oh, I don't know if I can do this. Like I'm really feeling like a fish out of water. And then somehow you do it and you just have to say, okay, I've done this before. I can do it again. I can learn this. It's a process that I feel grateful to keep repeating, and being with founders who are so patient and actually quite visual. Our CEO, Josh, does a lot of graph paper sketches that he'll just throw down and send me. And that really helps me get my brain around how this data should actually look and come to life.
The more real-time lo-fi sketching is really useful between people. Even if I sketch things out and I text it to a designer and we're on a call together, because there's no way I can hold a piece of paper up to this camera and have anybody see anything. I, for one thing, can't seem to get a piece of paper in front of the camera directly. It's always off to the side. And then they're like, do you see it? And they're like, I don't see anything.
And that's such a different process than even using like Figma, right? Like I can get them to sketch something, take a picture and text it to me. But if I'm like, oh, look, we can all see each other's cursors and we're in the same digital space, it's like there's this sort of aversion to it. It's interesting.
Yeah, these tools that at the beginning of the pandemic, I think a lot of people were really, I think they thought they were going to become super popular. But in the end, I still find myself sketching on a piece of paper, texting it to people. And it could be that I got locked in on that 10 years ago. And that's just the way life is going to be for me, you know?
I don't know. I think that there's something, well, first of all, what we know, and when I teach, my students really dislike this, and I had no control over it teaching online during the pandemic. But I have a rule that I learned from one of my favorite professors in grad school, Karen Chang, and she started, this is not an arbitrary rule, it's based in research, to take notes by hand, which makes sense in a design class because what happens when we give students laptops or even tablets is typing is not a visual activity, even scrolling around with a mouse or with your finger. You're not as generative and you're a lot less precious when you're just using hey, it's just a pen and paper. But there's something about when it gets onto a screen that feels really formal and feels like harder to edit or remove, less organic. And actually, there are different parts of our brains that light up when we're writing versus when we're typing. And there have been all these studies, as Karen always highlights when she introduces this rule at the beginning of class, which I totally stole from her, that, you remember things, you encode things more deeply when you write them with your hand than if you type them. And so it's just a no-brainer to me that if you're giving a lecture, students not only, distractions of social media on the screen that you can't see aside, even seeing somebody next to you as a peer who has their laptop or their phone open is a visual distraction. But if everyone's devices are down and all you do are listen or maybe take notes with your hands, the learning is so much deeper. It really, really is. So we have a sketchbook requirement, and we want that for thumbnail ideation and that bias towards non-precious ways of trying to visualize ideas, because as designers, that's what you have to do if you're the only designer in the room, is you have to have enough creative confidence to get up on that whiteboard or pull out your sketchbook and say, is this what you're talking about? And have people kind of talk around that artifact, even if it's really lo-fi. And doing that on a screen just has its limitations, I think, ultimately.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I often, first drafts, will stand up at a whiteboard and write them out or sketch them out. It's almost they're as visual as anything. If I can get an outline, then maybe I have a fighting chance. In the end, it's writing isn't easy to look at, to watch somebody try to do it. So there's a touch of, I do take notes. It's true, I do take notes on my laptop. Something that I've introduced into my life in the last couple of years are typewriters, in which there's no screen and they draw from you versus push anything at me. There is nothing that's going to happen until I add energy to the thing. And I have one next to the desk here at my office. I have one next to my desk. I write short scripts on them. Sometimes I just work through the day if I have a handful of things I need to figure out. But A, I like taking things apart and putting them back together, typewriter. And then B, I like working on typewriters. And they're these fascinating, beautifully designed things. The idea of writing by hand or taking notes by hand is also compelling. And I found that I've lost that over time. When I was a reporter, I could keep up with you. Like every word you said, I could transcribe as I went and then add a sketch or, notations. And now I feel like I've lost that. And probably just from lack of repetitiveness, I just don't do it.
Right. Or it's sort of what does the world require of you right now if you're collaborating with folks who expect to see content in a Google Doc? It's an extra step to take it from a written place into that space. And I love what you said about not having anything pushed at you. I think that mindset is so important if you're creating something. It's like the physical artifact, looking at a typewriter, which is older and has history and moving parts to it. That is fundamentally maybe going to shape different content or output than a keyboard would.
Yeah, there's no screen. And it's wonderful and it's so quiet. Except for when you're banging on the keys, which is very satisfying.
There's a typewriter at the coffee shop in East Lake Union Coffee, and they've had it there for years. It just sits off to the side where the barista brings your drink up. Mm-hmm. And it's one of my favorite things in Seattle because you go over there and you can just see little notes or poems that people have written down. And sometimes they change the ink color or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
It's always...
Everything looks beautiful on a typewriter. It's true.
Yeah.
Tell me how you became a designer. Where did you grow up? And was there a moment that led you to doing this?
Yeah. The first thing that came to my brain when you said, how did you become a designer, was by accident, I think. But the more that I practice design, and I say practice because my dad's a PA, he's a doctor, and he always calls it practicing medicine. And when I ask him, are you going to retire? He's 68. He says, well, I've made every mistake in the book, and now I feel like I'm kind of at the top of my game and I'm enjoying that. And they call it practicing medicine for a reason. And I sort of wish that we would talk about it that way from a designer perspective as well, because no matter what industry you're going to dive into, whether it's in-house or consulting, you kind of have this rougher runway or this sort of predictable learning curve. And I think we get better at approaching that takeoff and landing kind of every time. But I grew up in Salt Lake City, and I begged my mom for art classes since I was a little kid. And so I was lucky enough to go like almost every day after school and do fine art. We did this thing called imagination drawings. And it was amazing to me, actually, that as kids, because there were some rambunctious kids in my art after school art program, classic kind of ADHD, can't sit still. And this woman, Stephanie Burns, who founded the Visual Art Institute where we went, she would put on like classical music and she would leave the room and she would set a timer for 30 minutes and we weren't allowed to talk and we had to sit there and just draw. I think it was the greatest gift I've ever received because it allowed me a moment to learn how to focus. And I actually saw these other kids focus. And two, because I think they knew we got to play dodgeball later too, which was, she knew enough about kids of, okay, they can't do this forever, but let's have this quiet time. And I really hope that there are spaces like that for children now, because not only did we have that internal moment of I'm going to just be in my own zone and kind of focus in, but we actually did critique even at, this was like age 7 or 8, we would pin up our imagination drawings and we had to pick somebody to talk about and then they would pick somebody, and it was amazing. It sort of helped me feel like more comfortable putting work up. And I didn't know about design until after college because I continued with art and psychology as my majors and then accidentally ended up at IDEO after feeling a little burned out working in nonprofits in San Francisco, and was like, oh, I think this is the thing I've been doing, or have been interested in, the design research, the human-centered focus of making decisions that are not technology looking for a problem to solve, but really based in human-centered research, and those insights being translated into design decisions, putting up work that is not precious, letting people participate and talk about it and pick it apart and iterate quickly and put up rough prototypes. Like I just totally fell in love with it. And then from there, ended up going to grad school for interaction design.
For people who don't know about IDEO, or even just tell me about that agency, because I've stared at the website and I know that people love IDEO and there's wonderful resources on there.
Yeah, it's interesting because I didn't know that IDEO is a really famous design consultancy and perhaps like one of the most coveted places to work for designers until I was there. I sort of showed up to my interview and was like, I don't know what design thinking is. I don't know what you guys do, but I'm interested. And I think maybe that's how I got in, because I truly didn't have any context for where they sat in the world of, innovation or creative consulting. So IDEO is a global creative design firm. They are consultancy, which means that they work in a project-based way, although I know they've been kind of playing with that model since I left. I was there about 4.5 years, where they're doing more retainer-based work. So kind of embedding with clients for maybe a year or more, or vice versa, to really support things like transformational change at an organizational design level. Our CEO at the time was a product designer by training, Tim, and now the CEO is Sandy Spiker, who is a strong background in education. And so I think depending on who the leadership is, you see a different focus in both the process and approach, but also the types of work. So you're seeing IDEO move from an agency that helped design the first computer mouse, which really put them on the map, to not having as many industrial designers on staff and moving into a space that's kind of uncharted, where they're taking the creative process and applying it to larger organizational change projects. So they're competing with more of like the Deloitte and McKinsey's now around, okay, like how do we actually look at culture at an organization and how can we help shape that in a positive way? Or can we design a school system from the ground up in Peru? So really, really large, hairy challenges where design can get a little bit blurred in terms of the definition, but they're hiring really smart people who are design researchers with PhDs, who are business designers with MBAs from some of the top programs and with really strong management consulting backgrounds, who bring both qualitative and quantitative research into the design process and building teams in a bespoke way around each project as it sort of requirements.
There's always a call for groups of people willing to do difficult things, sit down and listen to a riddle and come up with an answer, come up with a path ahead.
Yeah.
That sounds like IDEO sort of just wanders down that path, and where the riddles take it is where they will be.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I worked in business development in my first role there, and for the majority of being there, other than just kind of, organically shifting into a design research role. But my job, one of my early jobs, was literally answering the phone. So we had a phone number, I don't even know if they still do, where people could call and say, I have this problem. I'm the CEO of MGM, or I have this problem. I am a random inventor in Dubai. I heard you can solve it. So can you please call me back? And I would have to call them back and do the first this was like relying back on my early training, picking up the phone at a mental health clinic in San Francisco for anybody that called, and trying to triage and understand like what the problem was so that I could connect them to the right resource. And doing this at IDEO was actually not super different. It was a lot of listening, a lot of note taking, and trying to understand, okay, is there a problem here that actually might be a good fit for us? And most of the time I had to find really generous ways to say no and connect them with like an alum who had left IDEO that could maybe do, still work with them in a specific content way, or for like a little less of a fee. But every once in a while you would get something really cool coming through the door. Like, hey, this is the city of San Francisco, and we're trying to put together an Olympic bid. Like, can you call us back? And we're like, I've never done that before, but yeah, let's try it.
Just a hotline where people call you up and hope you'll solve their problems. I've never really considered that, just putting a hotline up. And
it's like Dear Sugar or something, right? It's like late night radio, Sleepless in Seattle.
I don't know what that is.
Dear Sugar is, what's her name? I'm going to mess this up. We're going to have to look it up later. But it's people, anonymously writing her and saying, should I leave my husband? Or I have this crazy neighbor or whatever. And she would respond and everyone would get to read it. I want to say it's Cheryl Strayed who wrote the book about the Pacific Crest Trail, but I'd have to check. But, or Sleepless in Seattle, where the kid calls and says, my dad's dating, or find my dad a wife, and everyone's sobbing. The mom died, and like it's all public.
Yeah. I think just to track the questions is interesting enough.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. This is Megan O'Neill. I'm the producer of Input Doc. The inaugural season of Input Doc is now complete, and we would love to hear your feedback from season 1, suggestions for future episodes, or if you know someone who would be a great guest on the podcast. Hey, maybe that person is you. My email is Megan, spelled MEGHAN, @ClydeGolden.com. I hope to hear from you.
Since IDEO, you went and got a grad degree after that, and then you've been teaching also, I suppose part-time?
Yep.
On top of a full-time job.
Mm-hmm.
As a teacher at the University of Washington, and you've taught design and research, what are some foundational things that designers heading out as professionals should know?
That's a great question. I mean, design is such a broad and inclusive, hopefully more inclusive every day field, I think. So when I teach in the Human-Centered Design and Engineering department at UW, that's actually, I received my grad degree from the School of Art History and Design, and they pull in resources from the department I graduated in into their visual design class. They only teach one in each CDE. It's mostly students who want to be product managers or data scientists, or maybe UX researchers. And so they don't have one class or one sort of path for visual design. So it's a lot to try to pack in. What I do is I help them think about a design system. So they learn all of the really basic visual principles. They learn about Gestalt principles. They learn about visual perception. And then they start to build the foundational pieces of a brand. So they design a logo. They learn about typography, tone, color. And they put all of that together into redesigning or refreshing a brand for a local nonprofit. And they get this nice little sort of book at the end that they can put into their portfolios. But my hope is that through that process, they're sort of figuring out where they want to participate, because you can't sort of do everything. And most of these students won't become visual designers. But what's super important is that they learn the difference between what is good design and what isn't. And there is actually a really important way to talk about that. I mean, you can look at Dieter Rams' definition, right, of what is good design. There are sort of these lists or frameworks out there, but they need to be able to develop their own definition of what is good design and actually be able to articulate that. So the goal of the class is really to develop a visual vocabulary so that whether they end up getting really excited about visual design and taking kind of a slight turn and moving down that path, or they're a developer, they can participate in a conversation around critique to articulate why they don't think something is working. And it's the same reason that I had to take a coding class and totally like flail through it and hate it. So that when I work with developers now, I have more empathy for their process and also maybe a little bit of, it's like learning a new language, a way to understand, okay, I think this is what they're talking about. Ask smarter questions. Honestly, have a bit of a bullshit detector as well. People should have that for visual designers too. So it's sort of like exposure more than anything, but helping folks, I think, ultimately come up with what they think good design is, or even great design. And I would hope that the environment plays a role in that. Like if you look at Dieter Rams' principles of good design, he's an industrial designer, which the output of a lot of design there unfortunately ends up in landfills because it's physical product. He talks about good design being good for the planet, being long lasting, being simple, being something that everyone can understand. And so these are principles that I hope that they learn or kind of come up with their own definitions of to help them figure out how to have those conversations with multidisciplinary teams, really.
Doesn't it feel like a curriculum that every person in school should learn regardless of where they're headed?
Yeah. I mean, it's participating in a creative process. So
yeah. I think a lot of my usefulness came once I began to study other disciplines and have a sense of how other disciplines intersected with each other, having a better sense of design, dev. And your comment about bullshit detection is useful also. I may not know how to solve it, but I often know what reasonable and achievable solutions could be. And is there a path to get there? That alone, half my day, that's half my day, I feel like. Just conversations of like, what does the solution look like and what's a reasonable way of getting there? And I read recently, politics and elections are a lot like transit, in which they take you a little ways along the correct direction. They don't get you exactly where you want to go. And sometimes I feel like the design process and working with clients that way is we want to move the ball down the field, to use another bad analogy. But
no, it's true. I think that's right.
Yeah, it's a long, slow negotiation.
Yeah.
And there's no winning. Just keep moving forward. It's just sort of an interesting thing you get to do every day in this business.
Yeah, well, I think what you said is really important. It's like the definition of winning may be fuzzy or undefined, but playing on the field or the teamwork that happens or the learning that happens, learning how to fail, learning how to try things differently, understanding people's strengths on the team across client to creative service. It's really about coaching and supporting each other. Like, you know, the client is helping you understand their industry. They're the subject matter expert. Your job is to empower them with creative skills so that when you leave the project, they can take those outputs forward, or they've learned something new. They've got some skill around, or less of a fear around maybe sketching or whatever you want to say, so that their process is different. The way that they tackle problem solving is hopefully more creative. And I think that was really what IDEA was trying to do with design thinking at the most foundational level, was to really the end deliverable wasn't the visual thing or the deck or the I mean, maybe it was the rendering or the tech packs for how the product is manufactured. But really the value is in going through a creative process in depth and learning how to replicate that moving forward, if it makes sense to that client in the future, learning a different approach to problem solving so that you come up with hopefully more innovative solutions.
I think the one thing clients generally want is improvement. There's something they want to improve in. And just this process has helped quite a bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
I may not have perfectly figured out that question.
No, it's interesting though. It's like the thing that IDEO got criticized for the most when I worked there, where the big hard question in the room was like, well, how do you prove what your impact is? Like, cool, we get to go through this inspirational process where everyone learns a lot and gets inspired and has a lot of fun and gets to know each other and all of these great things. But once you guys leave and we have this thing at the end, whether it's a service or an experience or a product, how do you know, like, what's your track record? Like, did more people buy it? Did more people get better in the hospital? Whatever it was. And we were so ineffective at tracking that long-term impact. And yet we would still have people calling every single day. Can you help me? Can you help me? So I have to believe that the process was the product at the end of the day, even if there wasn't anybody tracking all of the impact.
That makes perfect sense. I feel like, did we get together and do the best that we could and help you improve as much as we could at this time with the info we had and the time that we had? And if you do that, that's respected and they are left with a good feeling about the process. And it's sort of that residual feeling about the process that really, I tried everything I could. This is where we're at and we'll try it again. And I feel like that's what we do for clients.
I like that.
One other question for you. I saw that you have a passion project called Repair Cycle.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you about this. And I know that the pandemic has slowed it down a little bit, but in essence, I was looking at Instagram and I have a bicycle and a trailer and a sewing machine. And what happens after that?
What happens after that? I know, it's like, well, once you have a bike trailer, then everyone has an idea. Like, what is it after that? Is it a mobile coffee shop? Is it a repair station? And so Repair Cycle was really fun. My friend David Diker, he was an undergrad senior at UW at the same time I was graduating from the grad program. And he showed up at the grad studio one day, which was kind of bold for undergrads. Like, they never came upstairs, right? And he comes over to my desk and he goes, "Are you Corinne?" And I was like, "Yes, hello." And he said, "My friend Adam told me to come find you because I heard that you're passionate about clothing waste or, reusing clothing and trying to find a way to build a circular economy around textiles. And I'm building a bike trailer and I think that, it should be a place that people can repair their clothing. I worked at Patagonia as a retail associate and as somebody who repaired clothes, and Patagonia is famous for this with their Worn Wear tour. They took sort of the giant, beautifully built, it was like a wooden trailer / van. And they put in all of these people who were repair techs and drove them around the Intermountain West and had people sign up to bring their well-loved Patagonia stuff to them. And they just sold out everywhere. I mean, they couldn't keep up with the demand. And so there is a market for people who want to keep their clothing longer. And the process in which people learn to repair things, like they'd sit with these techs and they'd sit with us at our bike trailer and watch us just even learn how to sew on a button, was really part of the product. Like, sure, they get their jacket patched or their jeans fixed and hemmed, but they also got to learn how to do that. And so the idea was that they could maybe go home and figure out how to darn their socks. And that through that process, you build a different relationship with your clothing. You invest in it differently. You make different buying decisions about companies that have higher quality products or who are hopefully more sustainable in their supply chain. Because the thing that blows my mind is there's no straightforward way to recycle clothing. It either goes in the landfill as solid waste or it goes in the incinerator. And then people will say, "Oh, but if you bring it to Goodwill or you send it to an organization that ships it overseas, they'll use it." And it's like, sure, it might have more reuse. It might get turned into rags. It might be something that somebody else wears again, but it's still solid waste on this planet, and it's heavy, and it's a physical thing that we make a lot of through fast fashion practices and through getting tired of things. And then it ends up in the landfill or it ends up as carbon emission. So we have to figure out how to have a different relationship with our clothes. So David and I, for his senior project, built this really cool bike trailer out of recycled wood and metal that he welded together. And we hitched it up to the bike. And then he had this sewing machine from his grandmother who was Dutch. And it's beautiful. And it's this artifact that really people see it from across, a square when we're working outside or, any event space. And you just see people want to come to it. It's like that typewriter sort of magic. What is this old, beautiful machine.
It looks like an old Singer, like a foot pedal Singer or something like that.
Yeah, it's over 100 years old and it still works. And it's hand crank operated, actually.
Yeah, things like that still work great. If you just need a straight stitch of various lengths, you're in a great spot with a Singer like that. It'll last forever.
Yeah, it's totally bulletproof. I mean, we put it in the bike trailer and biked over the bridge to the King County Alternative County Fair out in Redmond, and it made it. I mean, it made it on a ship here from Holland at some point, and yeah, it's pretty cool. So yeah, you hand crank it, it starts going as you make your straight stitches, and such a beautiful machine and easy enough to repair because the components themselves are well made. So it's been a fun little beacon for our project.
There's layers to what you're describing. People, I think, have a hunger to make things with their hands and to learn things, and they enjoy sort of demystifying how a button is sewn on or just seeing this. It's a break from the screen in our regular life.
Yeah.
And you get to sit down and use a different part of your brain, and you daydream about it later and you sort of long to do more of it, even if you don't really get into the thing. But that description you have of people see the old sewing machine, they come up to take a look, they sit with you, you repair something, they enjoy the process, and that residual, feeling in their brain that's left behind is a very positive thing. And it's similar to, I think, a well-executed design process, what you're describing at IDEO. That alone of just knowing I sat down and we did the best we could, and I feel okay about that. We didn't half-ass this one.
Yeah.
It's such a satisfying thing.
Totally. The demystification or seeing a physical or some sort of transformation happen, whether it's a change in thinking, an aha moment, or it's sewing together fabric, right? It's a very satisfying experience to have.
I one time removed cuffs from a dress shirt, shortened the sleeves, and sewed the cuffs back on. Like 27 YouTube videos later, and I was very proud of that. Probably never do that again. I probably will do that again, but
it's hard to do. I mean, what's so cool is seeing how many people were making their own masks. I mean, how is it that everybody had a mask well before you could walk into like a Target and buy them? People were making them and they were at home. It's super industrious. And most of the guys I don't mean to like boil it down to gender, but there were a lot of industrial designers in the undergrad program. They were interested in soft goods design, like wanted to go work for an REI or Mountain Hardware, and they would learn to sew from their grandmothers. And then they'd get really excited about taking that craft forward. And so it's great to see that happen through design and across generations and across genders. It's a very democratic thing to do. And we all wear clothes. It's our second skin. So it's like this universal thing we can really talk about, and it's a good conversation piece.
Yeah, the idea of gender identifying with sewing always irritates me. So I've built numerous boats and I sew the sails for each boat. And I've had guys come up to me like at a show and say, who sewed your sails? And I said, I did it myself. And I was like, you could do it too. And the look on their face is like, I don't sew. And I'm like, and I just think to myself, you're a fool who's limiting yourself in life. Like a sewing machine is just as cool as a bandsaw.
Absolutely. No, my dad taught me to sew because he did stitches. So I remember the first time I sat down with a needle and thread was sewing up a stuffed animal with a hole in it. And he taught me sutures, so it can come from anywhere.
Yeah. Good guy to learn from. Well, thank you very much for being on Input Doc today, Corinne.
Thank you for having me.
I really appreciate your time. Could you tell people where they could learn more about you?
Sure. My portfolio is outdated, as I'm sure most creatives will tell you. So if you go there, you can see older projects at Coreen, COREEN.design. But I do have my thesis on there and a little bit of fine artwork. You can find the Repair Cycle on Instagram at repaircycle_Seattle. And if you want to learn more about Ledger and the exciting things we're doing, you can go to ledger8760.com.
Cool. Well, thanks, Corinne.
Thank you so much, Tim. This was a blast.
Have a great day. Input Doc is produced by Megan O'Neill, edited by Lily Chu. The music you're listening to is an original creation by our very own Brian Leahy. We'd also like to thank our project manager, Scott Greger, who does all the work at the agency while we make this podcast. I'm your host, Tim Yaden. Have a great day.